Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the second half of our worst and best attributes of every character in Ultimate Alliance 3. Last week, we took some time and we had a deep dive at the front half of the roster, ending with Spider-Man. And this week, we are going to pick up where we left off and continue out through the remainder of the roster. Now, just to kind of remind you what the criteria we're looking at here is, this is not necessarily the worst ability that any given character has, but that does tend to overlap with quite a few of the characters that we've been looking at and focusing on. So just know that if I don't name something that's an ability of a character, that it's within the scope of what I'm hoping to discuss with this type of a video. Now, make sure that you leave a like on today's video if you enjoy it, and don't forget to subscribe for the daily variety content, because I've got a lot of really fun things that I have planned to share with you in the coming weeks. But let's go ahead and jump into our first character, that being Starlord. Now, Starlord is one of those characters that I have a really rough relationship with, and that's because of primarily one very specific rift that you have to use him as the solo character, and that rift is not a whole lot of fun because all things considered, Starlord does not hit incredibly hard. I will say that the best thing about his kit, though, is his Easy Breezy ability, and the reason that I like the Easy Breezy ability is because you can combo it into everything else that he has available in his kit to further amplify the damage that he is capable of dealing. Though, more often than not, you're going to want to focus on using Burning It Up and Amped Up with that, because those are the attacks that have a wider and more controllable area of effect. And you'll notice that I left one of those abilities out of the discussion. That's totally chill. I do feel like that is the weakest ability within Starlord's kit and the weakest attribute of the character, because he just kind of rains down a bunch of ice shards from the heavens, and it not only deals next to no damage, but you don't have any control over where they land, so it's just kind of a little bit of general suppressing fire that doesn't do a good job at that at all, which I find really problematic with this character. Next up, we have Storm, and Storm is fun for a lot of different reasons, and I personally have found that the best attribute of this character is her Ice Barrage ability. Now, these damage indicators don't give a whole lot of justification for that by themselves, but the fact that it has 6 different areas out in front of the character where ice will be rained down on top your opponents, and it has the chance to freeze your opponents as it is attacking into them, as well as adding the ice attribute to your allies' attacks. There's just a lot of good things that come out of this ability in terms of attacking into opponents, rendering them vulnerable to your own follow-ups, as well as amplifying the abilities of the rest of your team. And as for the worst attribute in Storm's kit, I think that it's the Whirlwind, and there's a lot of Whirlwind abilities within the game, and they're not inherently bad. The reason I don't like Storm's is because it locks her into her ability, and then you have to physically manipulate where that Whirlwind goes, and it's just not a good use of her resources at all. There's a lot of other characters that can do a lot better with their Whirlwind type abilities, and Storm just really kind of falls behind when it comes to that. Next up in our discussion, we have Thor. Now, Thor has a lot of really awesome things in his kit. Just as a general rule, he's one of the strongest characters in the game, and I highly recommend using him when you need great bursty damage dealing options. And no ability is better at that than Mjolnir's Might. This is a very heavy-hitting charge attack that allows him to rush across the battlefield, striking down opponents that are within his path, and if he doesn't outright stagger them, there's a very high chance that his electrical aspect of this attack is going to put them into a vulnerable state that allows you to follow up, or other members of your team to swoop in and incapacitate those opponents and take them down a lot quicker. There's a lot of really awesome things that Thor can do with this ability alone. Now, when it comes to the weakest thing in his kit, I do think that Stormbringer meets that criteria, and I just haven't found that it hits very hard compared to other attacks within his kit, and it has a very linear zone that it hits out in front of the character. Now, granted, it does have multiple lightning strikes that go out in a line in front of him, so it has a bit more range than other abilities in his kit, but the damage is lackluster, and you're better off using Thunder Strike and focusing on the opponents directly in front of you than you are to use Stormbringer and try and track down the characters that are far out in front of where Thor is positioned. Next up, we have Venom, and Venom has a lot of really cool things. I love playing this character because he feels very well designed and faithful to his character design. And the best thing about Venom is his starter ability here, the Venom Fang. This is another one of those charge type abilities. They're just really good abilities, all things considered, and I've said that multiple times because it is indeed true. And with the Venom Fang, you have the benefit of retreating down into the ground into a pool of symbiote and then lunging forward. So you do get to evade a couple of the incoming attacks from your opponents if they are striking up at your eye level or if they're shooting out their suppressing laser fire. This just really helps you to get around those attacks as they come out and surge forward and attack into them very, very quickly and knocking your opponents out of the way. Now, when it comes to the worst thing, if you watched last week's video, you probably should come as no surprise that the Dark Web is the worst aspect of Venom's kit because it does have a projectile-based function to it, but like other characters that have these web-type rapid-fire abilities, it just doesn't meet the needs of what a long-range attack would need to be to make this character that much more viable by having that as an option to them. And as an additional drawback, it does not have the benefit of being able to bind any of the opponents that have these shots connect with them. So it's really just kind of a waste of effort, and you're better off using any other ability in Venom's kit or just rushing them down directly in order to engage with targets that are farther away. Now, Wasp is another really awesome character that I have a lot of fun playing. She was one of the first characters that I got up to level 300 because of how useful she can be. Now, the best thing about her, I do believe, is the Tiny Tornado, and by itself, it deals some pretty decent damage, but the best thing about the Tiny Tornado is the ability to combo it with her Wasp Sting, and you can send these electrical shots zinging out all in 360 degrees away from where the tornado is positioned, and that really allows you to amplify your damage potential. But that wouldn't be possible without the Tiny Tornado, so I do have to give the Tiny Tornado just that little bit of edge. Now, when it comes to the worst thing in her kit, it's the big surprise. It's fairly inconsistent, and it is RNG based as to what effect you get based off of what drops out of it, because you have some things that'll explode, some things that'll just fall down and crush, and there's even a fidget spinner that crashes down onto the ground and spins around for a minute, which can throw your opponents backwards. Its inconsistency really doesn't play well to Wasp's specific kit and needs, and that's why it's in this position of being the worst attribute of her character. Next up, we have Wolverine. Wolverine is the last character in the base roster. Everyone else from this point on, you've got to unlock or access by purchasing the DLC expansion pack. So there's a lot of really fun things to come in the discussion as we continue through. But as for Wolverine, the thing that I think is the best about him is his Adamantium Assault. This is an attack that you can just use over and over and over again, either on its own or in a team-based synergy. And striking up into your opponents with a very hefty uppercut deals a significant amount of damage, and it puts him in a position where he can then combo a falling aerial onto it, which hits at least twice on its way down, depending on the height of the character. And that just allows you to rinse and repeat the attack a couple more times, especially when you are in rifts that accelerate your energy point recharge based off of it landing attacks, because the falling aerial does fall into that category. When it comes to the worst thing about his kit, I don't like the Claw Strike. There's better options for Wolverine for dealing large amounts of damage, and most of that comes from his Adamantium Assault, or if you want to rush down onto your opponents, the Berserker Barrage really works well with that. But the Claw Strike, it's fairly middle of the road. It still deals a decent amount of damage, but if you're looking to get the most bang from your buck, you need to go elsewhere in his kit. Breaking into the characters that you have to unlock through Infinity Rifts, we have Elektra. And Elektra has a fairly standard kit, all things considered, but one of the best things I think she has is her Lethal Ballet. This allows her to dash forward and attack on all sides of her, as well as directly in front of the character as she rushes down. It's very reminiscent of Chun-Li's helicopter spin kick, but she pulls it off very well and does a lot of damage and covers a good amount of ground while using this ability. When it comes to the worst thing in her kit, I have to give it up to the Throwing Stars. Again, this comes back to just being a rapid fire attack that doesn't really get as much benefit as one would hope that it does. And the reason I have this here as opposed to the explosive attack or the explosive assault, where she throws out a couple of thrown projectiles that then later explode, is these you can combo up and build up a little bit, whereas the Throwing Stars just kind of are decent at best at picking off characters from a distance when they are low on health, and she's much more efficient from a rushdown type battle style. There's just not a lot of value in the rapid fire shots in general. Next up, we have Loki. Loki is another character that really shines in some areas and really struggles in others. And one of the things with Loki in particular that is absolutely awesome is his Deep Freeze, because he will pull in two kind of shadow puppets of himself that stand on either side, and then all three of them will release a stream of frigid air out in front of him, and that deals a significant amount of damage and almost always will freeze the opponents that are caught up within those blasts, especially if you can line it up to the point where they're getting hit by two of those streams at once, which is fairly easy to do given how close they stand to each other. That's a really strong point of Loki's kit. Now, when it comes to the worst thing in his kit, I do think it goes to the Mystic Vortex, because this just creates a whirlwind that slowly creeps its way across the battlefield, and it doesn't really do a whole lot other than a little bit of area control. But there's other abilities in Loki's kit that are much better for that crowd control aspect, such as the Deep Freeze and the Frost Illusion. So Mystic Vortex doesn't really have a whole lot of benefit when compared to other things the character has to offer. Magneto's up next on our list, and Magneto has a lot of really awesome items and can be a bit of a nuisance to play against. And the Master of Magnetism is really what encapsulates that the most. He will pull up two very large chunks of debris from either side of him and then bring them slamming into his immediate frontal area, which deals large amounts of damage to his opponents. I wish it did more stagger damage than what it does, but you can't have everything, and that's totally fine that that's a way to balance out the efficiency of this attack in particular. Now, when it comes to the worst thing in his kit, I've got to give it up to the Fatal Attraction. There's not a whole lot of abilities that set up a timed gravity area, but this one is particularly bad because you hold on to this forever, and it only ever explodes once you have released it. I think this would have been a lot better if you could just set it up. It would run on its own for a couple of seconds before causing that explosion and dealing the larger burst of damage towards the end. Similar to what happens with Cable, and we'll touch on that a little bit more once we get to that character. Next, we have Thanos. Thanos is a very sought-after character. However, this is not the version of him that's the absolute best in this game, so he can be a lot of fun to use still. And a very excellent exhibit of that is his Crushing Blow. This is a very powerful attack that allows him to latch onto smaller grunt-type enemies and then pummel them right into the ground. It deals large amounts of damage and deals damage to characters that are in the immediate vicinity as well. And if he whiffs, or if a grunt type character is not available to be picked up, he will still slam into the ground and deal a lot of damage in the general area, similar to how he would carry that out if he did have a character to pummel. When it comes to the worst thing in his kit, though, it's not a huge surprise. It's the Incineration Beam. This just does not offer the type of damage that you would expect or want, especially from one of those long-range abilities. And granted, you can kind of hold it out and you can influence it in the immediate front area of where Thanos is facing, but it's a very weak ability within his kit as a whole. You'd be better off using the abilities that do not synergize with other members of your team before really opting for this one. We're moving into the actual DLC characters now. These first two are free DLC characters and the rest are a part of the DLC expansion. If you've made it this far into this video, or if you watch a lot of my Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 content, you already knew that. So when it comes to Cyclops, what's really powerful about him is his triple shot. I think that this is one of the better retreating options within the game. There's not a whole lot of characters that have abilities that actively cause them to retreat. But with Cyclops, he will jump up into the air, which offers him some initial disengagement from the skirmish that he's engaged in. And then he lets out 3 different blasts that layer into the ground and explode on contact with the ground to really throw the opponents out of the way. You'll probably end up using it just as much as a retreating option as a damage dealing option, because it is pretty efficient at doing both, as well as dealing a fairly quick burst of damage on all 3 of those visor blasts. Now, what's the worst aspect of his kit? It's the Optic Blast, hands down. Not only is this a beam attack, but it has one of the weirdest behaviors of any beam attack, maybe outside of Rocket and Groot's Quantum Igniter. Because when he's using his Optic Blast, he is locked into a position staring straight ahead, firing that laser, and then instead of turning his head and moving the beam as it flies across the battlefield, he leaps awkwardly to the side, forward, or backward, and that just is counterintuitive to what you would want this ability to do based off of being able to cover a large area. It's highly inefficient, and I really don't like it. Colossus is a character that hits very hard and has a lot of really awesome aspects to him, but none, in my opinion, are better than the Armored Assault, because this allows Colossus to pick up a grunt type character and he will swing around a lot and bash that character into anyone else that comes within contact before finally slamming that character down into the ground. And again, if he whiffs on grabbing a grunt type character, he will still swing around with both arms outstretched and clothesline anyone that comes too close to him. Granted, he can only pick up the grunt character as the attack is initiated, but it still deals a lot of damage either way, and the fall off isn't that drastic if he doesn't manage to pick somebody up. So that's a really awesome aspect of his kit. When it comes to the worst thing, I do think I have to give it to Cold Hard Steel. Now, I think that this is really awesome because it allows him to slowly walk forward through different hazards, and that does include any of the laser grids or other blasts such as the Panther laser in Wakanda. It really allows him to circumvent and negate that and still maintain some degree of mobility as he does so. However, I just really don't think that it does as well as other protect type abilities within the cast, because it relies on shots ricocheting off his own body as opposed to attacks that can directly reflect off in a predictable angle. That's just a little bit too inconsistent for my liking, and everything else in his kit is very solid. Into our Marvel Knights DLC characters, we start off with Punisher. And what I really like about Punisher is his smoke screen. This is a really great ability. It won the DLC Privilege Award for him while we were covering the character, and it just has a lot of benefit to it. He will send out a puff of smoke that disorients any character that's in that vicinity, and then he rushes in and slashes with a couple of knife flourishes, which does really well for closing out close quarters combat while assuring that you're not going to take any retaliation damage from the characters that you are engaging with. Now, he can still be thrown back by grenades and other things, but that's consistent across the remainder of the cast, so I can't fault this ability for things that just kind of naturally counter it. But what I don't like at all for this character is his fire in the hole ability. Again, it's one of those burst or explosion type damage dealers that is not consistent at all. It's a series of grenades that go out and explode after a couple of seconds, and though it can deal some decent damage, you're going to spend a lot more time trying to focus on getting a large group of characters together, at which point you'd be better off using the smoke screen anyway to get the maximum yield off of using an ability. Next up, we have Blade. Blade is super awesome, and he's one of the most unique characters within the cast because all of his abilities can be charged up to additional potency, and he remains somewhat mobile while he is charging those abilities up. And none of them are better than the Bleeding Edge. Again, this is another winner of the DLC privilege move, and this just really speaks to how powerful Blade can be. He will charge up a glaive, which upon releasing it will bounce around the battlefield, deflecting off opponents and walls, and it can hit multiple opponents a couple of times in certain cases if the environment serves just right, and it can absolutely decimate stagger gauges as well as dealing additional damage, especially if you hold it to its full charge before releasing it. Now, when it comes to the worst aspect in his kit, it goes to the high stakes. Yes, you can fire up to 7 different stakes if you fully charge it, but he does make micro adjustments as he's firing those out, which adjusts for a little bit of spread, but you can end up missing some of the targets that you're going for, and they don't deal great damage, all things considered. So this is definitely a low point of the character's kit. Everything else does very well. This is just one that I don't ever use because of how infuriating and inconsistent it tends to be. Next up, we have Moon Knight. Moon Knight has a couple of things that are very interesting and unique to him, but one of the things that I think is the absolute showstopper is his Vengeance Burst. This allows him to retreat away from his opponents, and then he throws out an arc of shurikens that will explode upon contact with opponents, and they have a very wide area that they spread out in front of this character, and he offers himself a little bit more distance by doing a back flip before going into the crescent toss, and that just allows you to really spread out and get the maximum effect out of these shurikens as he throws them into the oncoming opponents as well as disengaging from them. There's just a lot to love with this ability and how well it works based off of how it's designed. When it comes to the worst thing in his kit, I do think that it goes to the moon landing. This just doesn't have nearly long enough of a charge time in order for you to get a decent zone on it. Yeah, you can kind of aim it, but there's not a whole lot of time to do so before he automatically initiates that attack. And I would have liked it a little bit better if he had more time to set up where he wants to go when and if you are trying to use this ability based off of strategic repositioning as opposed to using it in a synergy-based attack. Next is Morbius. Morbius has a ton of really awesome things in his kit, and this one was a little bit close for me. Though I did give the Hypnotic Gaze the DLC Privilege Award, I actually think that Claws and Fangs is the better attribute in his kit, because while Hypnotic Gaze will cause the opponents to be staggered for a couple of seconds and they'll need to reorganize themselves after being stunned as well as having their defense dropped, Claws and Fangs will rush down any opponent in its vicinity, and if he latches onto a grunt character while he's using the ability, he will draw from their life force and allow himself to boost his own damage output. And so yes, comboing that with the Hypnotic Gaze is great, but I think that there's more of a benefit in being able to get a minimal amount of healing as well as damage amplification, as opposed to just rendering opponents vulnerable for a few seconds and dropping their defense. When it comes to the worst thing in his kit, I think it goes to the Slashing Strike, and the reason I don't like this is because he will just kind of pop in and out all the way across the battlefield, and it's decent for closing out the last couple of kills, especially if characters are further away, but it's seldom worth the benefit of using this type of an attack because it's just kind of wasteful. You can't synergize it, and so you've got to know that that's what you're going for and make that switch and use it. It just really doesn't do very well more often than not, and I would have preferred having something a little bit different designed, though it is incredibly faithful to Morbius's combat, so I can understand why it was included. Into our X-Men DLC characters, we have Iceman. Iceman is one of the kings of ice-type damage, or rather, the king of ice-type damage within this game. And there's not really a whole lot that demonstrates that better than his Shimmering Shards ability. This is a very powerful attack that shoots up a spiring arc in a cone-shaped area of those icicles directly in front of the character that lands and deals large amounts of damage, and within close proximity it even has the ability to freeze some of the grunt type characters or even the mighty characters that you may encounter, which allows you to perform additional follow-ups while they are rendered completely defenseless as they freeze in place. But when it comes to the worst thing in his kit, I really don't think that the Arctic Blast gives you enough bang for your buck. Yeah, it has the chance to freeze some of your opponents if they get caught up in it for a while, but you can't continuously use this stream. It does run out after a short amount of time, and the damage that it deals just kind of leaves you wanting more. So you're much better off opting for either the Shimmering Shards or the Ice Impact, as opposed to using the Arctic Blast. Gambit is one of my favorite characters to play in this game. He's incredibly fun and very useful, and one of the reasons I absolutely fell in love with the character is his Dangerous Ground ability, where he can set up a field of influence that deals continuous damage to his opponents as well as slowing their movement speed, allowing you to get more shots or attacks into them as opposed to taking more damage from them. And you can have up to 2 of these areas active at any given time, which especially in large battlefield areas really restricts the areas that your opponents can navigate to avoid taking damage. And it, like I said before, it renders them vulnerable to additional damage as they are slowed in their movement. When it comes to the worst thing in Gambit's kit, I do think it's the Kinetic Burst, and that's not by a whole lot. Gambit, as a general rule, has a very solid kit. The Kinetic Burst just has some problems with being a little bit too close to him, so the most that you're going to use this is as a Get Off Me tool, and if you're going to use a Get Off Me tool, you may as well use Luck of the Draw, because you can set up multiple different bursting attacks on the ground and then detonate them at your own will with a falling aerial or heavy attack. And the Kinetic Burst just doesn't offer that versatility, so that's why it's the worst attribute, but it still has its uses as opposed to other worst attributes that we've talked about up until this point. Next on our list we have Cable. Cable, I think, is one of the weakest characters within the DLC, but he does have his uses, so you may end up finding very specific reasons to place him on your team. And one of those that makes him pretty strong is his Gravity Bomb. This allows you to draw in opponents, and we kind of talked about this with Magneto, but as opposed to being locked in place, Cable will just kind of throw this out, it'll draw opponents in for a couple of seconds, and then blast and deal some additional damage once the duration has ended on that attack, as opposed to you being locked in one position and holding it, and basically rendering yourself useless for as long as you're using that attack. This is not the case for Cable like it is for Magneto, and this just really proves a lot of power to the character and how they function. Now, when it comes to the worst ability in his kit, I was debating between the Tech Shield and the TK Spike, but with the Tech Shield, you at least have the ability to render yourself invulnerable to incoming damage, and you can get some more of that reflection, though I don't particularly like the way that it behaves similar to Colossus, where it sends those shots ricocheting off from any side of the character as opposed to a direct prediction that you can get out of it. But ultimately, I think the TK Spike is a little bit worse, because yes, you can have some control over detonating it before the detrimental effects set in, but there's a pretty significant reduction in his own defenses if you overclock the TK Spike, which when you're first using the character, you're more than likely to do. And that debuff that he applies to himself lasts for a very significant amount of time. I just don't think that it was necessary to include this type of a self-hindering ability, especially when it's the only one in the game. If it didn't have that self-hindering to it, I don't think that I would value it as low, but it just doesn't give you the benefit that you would hope for when using that type of an ability, and it still remains fairly close to him as well, which just isn't great. Phoenix is up next. Phoenix has a lot of really awesome things in her kit, but none of them are better than the Cleansing Flames, because this is an area of effect similar to Gambit's Dangerous Ground, but the biggest difference is, as opposed to slowing down your opponents, it will draw from their life force and restore energy points to your entire party. And that really, really helps when it comes to breaking down instances of combat quickly and efficiently, because you have a self-sustaining pool of energy points that will passively increase in addition to attacks that you send out to replenish them just based off of basic game mechanics. That is absolutely phenomenal, and I love that a character has something like that. When it comes to her worst attribute, the biggest thing that I've found problems with is the Cosmic Might. It's similar to a couple of attacks that we've talked about, such as Gambit's Kinetic Burst, where it just sits a little too close to the character to have a whole lot of real benefit. And Phoenix gets a much better benefit out of her Phoenix's Fury, which allows her to disengage while dealing additional damage and leaving a wake of flames that'll linger for a few seconds and deal some additional damage if enemies get caught in it. Or the Telekinetic Talon, which will grab a grunt type character and basically choke them out with flames while still dealing damage to the other characters that are within that vicinity. Cosmic Might just doesn't quite have what it takes to keep up with the other things she's capable of doing. Next is Mr. Fantastic. Mr. Fantastic has some things that he does very, very well. He has other things that I just fundamentally disagree with. And one of the things that does very well for him is his elongated attack. This allows him to stretch up above the battlefield and then rain down a barrage of punches down onto the ground and the area that the opponents are congregating in immediately in front of him. Granted, it's not the most mobile of his abilities, but it does really allow him to focus his damage into one central location, which has a slew of benefits behind it. But when it comes to the worst thing in his kit, it has to be the full momentum. This ability is just haphazard and very, very difficult to control, and even if you do get a good chance at controlling it and learning how to use it most efficiently, he will bounce off of his opponents if you hit them head on, and that causes him to have a delay in the damage that he's capable of doing. That is just a very bad design in my opinion, and I don't like the fact that that's the way that this ability works. So I never use the full momentum except for maybe times where I get bored and want to traverse somewhere a little bit quicker. Then I might break it out just to have some sort of fun traversal option, but I highly discourage that because it exhausts your energy points, which you should be reserving for combat. Invisible Woman is another character that's not super awesome. She has a lot of things in her kit that aren't super great, but for me, the best thing that she can do when engaging in combat is she can set up this invisible wall, which if you charge it up to its maximum potency, she'll send 3 of them rippling out in front of her, which will then roll into opponents and deal additional points of damage. And the wall does linger for a couple of seconds and provides cover from incoming energy blasts or projectile fire from your opponents, which really kind of helps. It just doesn't stick around long enough to really be a game changer, which I am okay with, I suppose. I would like to see it have its duration increased, but I realize that that's not going to happen at this point in time. Now, when it comes to the worst thing in her kit, it has to go to the Force Spheres. Again, this is another one of those rapid-fire type attacks, and yes, it does have the chance to bubble up your opponents and leave them vulnerable, suspended, floating in the air, but you've really got to use the attack a lot in order to get that as a benefit, and so it more likely than not ends up being a large detriment to her ability and a waste of the energy points that you could be spending on other abilities in her kit. So, not on the high list of recommendations for me when it comes to the Force Spheres. Now on to Human Torch. Human Torch, he had so much potential, and I just feel like he was done wrong in a couple of crucial areas. But one thing that doesn't fit that criteria is his Flash Forward. Again, it's one of those charge type abilities, and for Human Torch, this one does quite well, allowing him to flash past his opponents and deal a significant amount of damage, while all the while setting up a trail of flame that continues to deal some damage, and adding that attribute to a couple of and having the option of dealing that continuous damage to his opponents within the area that he dashed through. So really great ability there. I just wish that some other aspects of his kit were done a little bit differently. And by that, I think that the weakest point is his controlled burn. The field or the area of effect does not stay around very long, so you don't get a whole lot of benefit from the burn zone that he sets up. And it just is highly inconsistent. Sure, it adds the fire aspect to your allies' attacks, but there's other characters in this game that can add that same benefit, or a more beneficial one such as electricity or freeze, that just tend to have a better payout, all things considered. Now, Thing has a lot of power behind him, and he's one of the hardest hitting characters in the game. But there's no better showcase of that within his kit as the Double Clobber, where he will reel back and charge up two very powerful fist blows that hit simultaneously. These can absolutely wreck and destroy opponents, despite the fact that it does have a little bit of a charging animation to it. It will still strike very powerfully and knock your opponents flat. It's even capable of destroying a couple of the field hazards that are present throughout later portions of the game. I'm specifically thinking of the teleporters in the epilogue, where Dr. Doom sets them up all over the place in that cast. Thing is really good for breaking those down and doing so very quickly. Now, when it comes to the worst thing in his kit, there's not a whole lot of things in his abilities that I hate, and so this is one of those instances where I'm going to chalk up the worst thing in his kit to being that last hit in his light combo. It has an excessive delay in a wind up into that punch, and it's just not beneficial. I highly recommend omitting that final strike from his light attack combo and opting for an uncharged heavy attack, simply based off the fact that it's going to come out faster and give you about the same amount of damage dealt. And if you really want, you can continue to hold that button and charge up that heavy attack for an even stronger strike, but the final hit in the light attack sequence is just abysmally long, and I hate the fact that that's designed that way. Moving on to Dr. Doom, we have a lot of awesome things about this character, but the crux of his kit and his design is his loyal servant. I love the options that are opened up by being able to summon a loyal Doom bot that will then mimic your moves. I mean, on its own, it will just kind of sit there and set up an area of electrical effect, which deals decent damage on its own, but when you match that with abilities such as the Spark of Genius or the Supreme Glory, it really strikes incredibly hard and allows him to really churn through the opponents that you conduct battle against. Now, when it comes to the worst aspect of his character, I actually don't feel like I can list the Unmatched Might as one of those low points, because it's made much, much better and the best beam type attack in the game when paired with the Loyal Servant, which you should always be doing for maximum efficiency. So what I think is the worst attribute of Dr. Doom's kit is his heavy attack, and that's specifically because he teleports away or closer to the nearest opponent, but there's really no circumstance in which you would want to use his heavy attack because of that long animation that it takes up, and the underwhelming benefit that you get out of it when and if you do land it. So just use anything else in his kit and don't opt for the heavy attack, because the delay is just not going to pay off at all. And last but certainly not least, we have Thanos Infinite. And the best attribute about this character can be highly debated, but I personally think that it's the Soul Siphon, because it's the best of both worlds. You get a little bit of Cable's Gravity Bomb, and you get a little bit of Phoenix's Cleansing Flames, where it will draw opponents into one centralized location, continuously drain away from their health and their energy points, all the while restoring those resources back to Thanos himself to power him up and keep him fresh for any amount of combat that you are going to go into. Now, of course, the energy points have a lot more value to that than the hit points do, but it's always nice to remain healthy when you're engaging in combat. So this ability is by far one of the most powerful in the game, thus making it the highlight of Thanos Infinite's kit. Now, the worst thing about his kit is the infinite power. I just don't feel like this one yields enough benefits based off of what it offers. If you fully charge it up, yes, you can send a sweeping arc of energy across the battlefield that will stagger out your mighty enemies, but there's not a whole lot of instances where you're going to want to do that, as opposed to just popping your extreme attack, which will do that instantaneously, as well as freeze their stagger duration. It's just a fairly weak point, and if you use it in an uncharged variety, it's just a singular laser shot directly out in front of the character. Now, there's a couple of areas where that's particularly useful in speedrunning, but apart from that, it's not something that I really put any sort of emphasis or benefit on. But that is it. We've talked about a highlight for everyone in the roster and the low point for everyone in the roster. So if you enjoyed this two-parter as a whole, make sure that you leave that in the comments down below. Let me know what your favorite or least favorite attributes about any of the characters on the roster are. I'm interested to hear your feedback as well. And as always, if you've made it this far into the video, check to see if you're subscribed. Go ahead and fix that if you haven't, as that really helps me out and I would greatly appreciate it if you did. Thanks so much for your time, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.